Hi, my name's Alison Perry. I'm a speech pathologist and owner of Soundality. This is the fourth video in a series that I'm doing for parents and carers who have children starting school next year. And the topic today is sight words. This is a source of confusion and frustration for many parents and children. And I'd like to clear up a few common misconceptions about what they are and about how they need to be taught. So I think sight words is actually, to begin with, a really bad name for these lists of words that we commonly want to teach our children to remember by sight as a whole word chunk. And unfortunately, this goes completely against what the research is saying about how our brain actually learns to read. So instead of calling these words sight words, they should be called high-frequency words, and I'll explain a bit about why. So high-frequency words are words that we commonly encounter in early stories, so for our beginner readers, these simple stories. And there's been some understanding in the past that these words are just too phonically complex for children to be able to sound out, so instead they need to remember them as a whole chunk, as a whole word. But unfortunately this isn't the case, and it doesn't reflect how our brains actually learn and store these words. And the fact is that their sight words or high frequency words are stored in exactly the same way and exactly the same place in our brain as any other word. It's not like we've got this separate compartment of, oh, that's a sight word and I'll put it over here in this part of my memory to visually remember it. It's not how it works. So what we want to do when it comes to sight words is think about, is this a word that my child has the understanding, so the knowledge and the skills to be able to sound out, or is there something in there that's a little bit tricky that I'm going to have to help them out with? So the first few words that children will encounter frequently in their first little readers are words like I'm just about to show you. So this is a book, these are Sounds Right readers, and this is one from a very early level, and we would expect if a child is going to read this book that they know the letter sounds that go together with these ones here. So the a, I, s, and t, and the n, o, and p. And if they've got that letter sound knowledge and they have a little bit of help from a parent or a teacher to read these high frequency words that may contain a bit of letter sound linkage here that they haven't yet done, they should be able to read these almost independently. So it starts off just with single words, naming our characters. So here we've got Tip the dog, and the girl's asking Tip to do this, it, sit. Now in this little sentence here, it's saying it, sit, on, nothing too complex about that. But if a child goes to read the word the, and they early on are taught that we just read one letter at a time, they're going to go t, eh, and that doesn't get the word the. So this is where mum, dad, grandma, teacher steps in and says, this word is the. So these two letters, the th, are the z sound, and this is the So for a young child, they might not need the whole explanation. It's important for us to know, but we just say, I'll help you with this one, it's the. And through repeated exposure, where we're tuning into the fact that the th is the z and this is the that will get stored. It's still got to go via what are the sounds, how are they written down, and getting it stored that way. Now this word's not so much of a problem, mat, so sit on the mat, tip. So we're going to encounter some words like the. Another high frequency word that we'll come across in those early books is this one here, where a young child is going to read it as I and s, and is isn't going to work. So we just say this is, or this is how we write the z sound in this word is. This is another one, the word So you're going to get a few coming through that do require some children to get some support. But when you look at those lists of sight words that will sometimes come home in that first year of school, a lot of them are actually completely decodable for a child that has basic letter sound correspondence. So the way we get a word like this actually stored so that it becomes a sight word, so that it becomes a word that we can automatically recognize, it's still through the process of saying the sounds and reading the word that's there. So it's still at and and we want to have our children sounding out words in order to read them. Through repeated practice, for some children, many, many times of practice, that will become a stored word. But our brains still continue to process individual letters or small groups of letters, even as a skilled reader. So it feels like we read in whole words, but the fact is that we don't. We are still processing the sounds and the letters and how they link together when we read as a skilled reader. I'll show you an example of how we might actually go about teaching a word that has one of these tricky parts. And this is a word that will commonly come up as an example when someone says, oh, but this word you just have to know because it's so phonetically difficult. But I'll show you a way that we can teach it so that it is actually quite straightforward. So these are the sounds we have in the word said. And we see this word a lot in our books. So it might say, the girl said, sit, tip. So these are the sounds we need to build sip. Try again to build said. So what's the first sound in said? It's good. And which of these is how we write s. So there's nothing difficult about that spelling there. Now what's the next sound? So we're linking what's the sound we say to the letter that writes it down. Said. Said. So what sound do we hear when my finger is under this line? The sound is eh. And this is where I jump in and say, now the way we write eh in the word said is like this. It's very uncommon, we don't use it very often, but these two letters go together to write down the sound eh. And this really happens extremely rarely in English. We get it in the word said and again and against, but other than that, you're not going to see this as a spelling for eh. But in the word said, which is a high frequency word, this is the spelling. So we've got s-e, and the last sound is d, and there's nothing too tricky about spelling it that way. And then when it comes time to write this word, it's done in the same way. So the sounds are s-e, d. So we've got the way we write the e sound is with two letters, and this is our tricky bit. We have to remember that, and this is the d. But we don't need to remember the word as a whole, as a sight word. So I think it's really important that we consider, are these words that my child is encountering something where there's just a small part I need to help out with? I was speaking with a friend the other day and she was saying these two words had come up in her son's little reader. And I'll just give you the examples. So this is the first word. And in this instance, I would give the child the whole word and say, when we see this, this is the word are. So these dogs are sleeping. The other one that came up is this word. Excuse my upside down writing. So the p isn't too tricky for a young child to sound out. In the word put, this is how we write oo. So that's the bit I would be giving. I'd just say, when we read this, this is oo. And then the child can go p, oo, t, and get the word put themselves if they blend those sounds together. So just to recap, we don't want to be teaching our children big banks of sight words. It's not based on what current science is telling us about how our brains learn to read. We are better with our time, spending our time teaching our child to say the sounds and decode words, and through repeated practice of words that they can sound out independently, they will end up being stored as a sight word. And by that I mean as a word that they do automatically recognize. So when it comes time for them to pick up a little story and read it, it becomes sit on the. They might still sound this out, at, mat, and this might be sounded at, hip, tip, but you will start to see more and more words be automatically recognized. There's a really nice quote, I'll put a link to it in this video below, and it says that if we teach a child 10 words, to recognize 10 words, then that child can read 10 words. If we teach a child to recognize the sounds of 10 letters, and obviously teach them how to blend and segment those sounds, they can read 350 words that have 3 sounds. And it's even more if those words have 4 or 5 sounds, so I'll put that little quote in. But it's a fairly powerful one for me to show that our time is much better spent working on phonics, so really making those links between what are the sounds and how are they written down, rather than teaching our child to recognize big banks of words as a whole. On average, it takes a child about 3 years to learn how to read, and even longer to learn how to spell accurately, and no one is a perfect speller. But early on, we want to get them started in the right way and give them the confidence and the security to know that sounding out is an accurate and really highly successful way to read words. The way we do that is through our decodable readers. So I've done a video on that a little bit earlier. But I hope that gives you a bit of freedom. You can do away with those sight word flashcards and instead teach your child to recognize individual letters and individual sounds and blending those together. You're going to get a child who builds skills more easily and who has those skills that when they encounter a word they've never seen before, they actually know what to do to problem solve and work it out.